serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah.
Good morning, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini, and we are continuing in the book of Hosea, chapter 7. We're in verse 8. Yeah, it's just a thought that sort of, all the thoughts are collective together, but I don't think we need to do any recapping of the previous section at the moment. Except, the oven analogy, I'll just call that to mind. Because they say they prepared their hearts as an oven, it's burning. Having to do with the passion. Or another, one of the words for zeal, that's sometimes translated zeal, I believe in the New Testament. But it's heat, or heat, which is also for passion. And even to this day, we carry the same sort of idiomatic expression of passion when you're hot for something. Anything. It could be like, I'm real hot to go to the amusement park. Heated up is it's a metaphor for excited. And the things people are excited to do, of course, can be good or bad. And the idea is in the northern kingdom of Israel, they are hot to do evil. But of course, in Revelation, the Lord Jesus says that the only thing worse, hot to do evil isn't so great, or cold towards God, whatever. However you want to look at that, because like I said, it's bad or good. But lukewarm apathy, he saw, is even worse. Because in a sense, it's a harder problem to tackle. It's not so, if you've got passion one way or the other, I found, sometimes people who are big sinners, like the Apostle Paul, there's like that, you snap out of it, so to speak, where you realize just how wretched you are. But when your wretchedness is mediocre, it's not like this horrible wretchedness, but it's just kind of like this everyday mediocrity. Not so obvious. So Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is a cake not turned. I remember this being explained to me, but it didn't make a lot of sense. I did talk about this a little yesterday. But a cake not turned is an obvious analogy. At least the picture is obvious. We can picture a pancake on the stove, and we're thinking about a hot stove. The heat's too high, and the cake isn't turned. So on one side, it's cooked way too much, and on the other side, it's still wet. You fancy, you like some pancakes with where one side's battery and the other side's black. It's not cooked right. It's unevenly cooked. And that may relate something to this idea of he hath mixed himself among the people. If I'm going to relate them, I'm going to have to do it on the fly here, because I don't know exactly how that relation is. But he has mixed himself among the people, and the next strangers have devoured his strength, the next verse says. Because in the Old Testament, there's, Israel was not to mingle themselves with the people of the land. And it wasn't like, they will dilute your racial purity or anything like that. It was a simple matter of, they will turn you after their gods. I mean, their daughters will seduce your sons to worship their gods, and their sons will whatever. It's like by intermarrying with the people of the land, they would become corrupted because they wouldn't share the same history, background, and all that. And this is still true today. In the New Testament, Paul, when he talks about marriage, now he does say, let the believing, wife or husband not depart from the unbelieving, meaning because you never know, because this is Christianity, we're in the business of converting people. Whereas the Jews, that wasn't the thing. It was like they were God's chosen people. Marrying other people is bringing in an outsider, and it's not necessarily welcoming them in. Though there was rules about that, like rules. I'm just thinking of a passage where it says, a Moabite will not enter into the congregation to the 10th generation. That may just mean never. You know what I mean? The 10th generation, you're talking about 2 to the power of 10. Yeah, as far as like 2 parents. So it's like 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 times 2 is 4 is actually the second power. First power is 2. 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, not 24, Paul, what is your, 32, 64. I know this series. It's a computer series. It should roll off my tongue. 128, 128 was 6, 256, 512, 1024, and 2048. That means, you remember that politician who took a lot of flack for being 1,024th native? Saying someone can't enter the congregation to the 10th generation if they're a Moabite means, it says, you're less than 1/2048th Moabite. So that's an essential never, because that is that is less than 0.1%. So, anyways, actually, I didn't. Well, whatever percentage, whatever. But it's like that's the power of 2 series. And so, anyways, but in Christianity, we are not to get a divorce or to put away strange wives as they did when Nehemiah returned from the Babylonian captivity. But we certainly are not encouraged to marry outside the faith. And I would always say it's not wise. If you're a zealous Christian, you shouldn't knowingly get married to someone who isn't. Or certainly to someone who's of a completely different religion. Now, some people don't like that, but I don't care. It's not a good idea. If they're, and, zealous, you gotta be careful, man. I'll tell you, because a lot of times people, because of wishful thinking, I know someone once who married someone and he thought she was a zealous Christian. She really wasn't. But her zeal was manufactured for his benefit. She was a Christian, all right. And she mouthed some degree of Christian interest, because he presented it as like a question. And, I don't know, maybe that's a flaw. And I remember when I was much younger, when I was looking for a wife, I thought I would kind of ask these questions. But you forget, if someone likes you and they are interested in a relationship and they realize it's important to you and you start asking after it, it is very possible that they will exaggerate their dedication to the faith for your benefit. just like people do. That's why it's important. When I met my wife, we weren't courting. We were just two people who got involved in a Bible study, and the romance was not at all the first thing on anyone's mind. So, if romance is primary on people's minds, they can exaggerate the truth. You know what I mean? Guys will lie about how much money they make, or exaggerate how important their job is, or do whatever it takes to impress a girl. Very often, that's what people do. And women will do the same thing if they're interested. If the guy seems to be, if she finds a man's religious dedication to be attractive, even if she's not very dedicated, she'll pretend. So it's a treacherous business, this love thing. That's why I recommend people don't think in terms of love, but in terms of logic, honestly. And that may sound cold and all that when it comes to romance, but you know what? It's better than, if you want to have something that works out in the long term, it's easier to fall in love foolishly than to find someone you can commit to for a lifetime. You know what I mean? To find someone you can commit to happily for a lifetime and commit to in a relationship is a lot harder than foolishly falling in love. And you can just go ahead and foolishly fall in love afterwards if you find the right person. Just go ahead and foolishly fall in love with that person instead of doing it the wrong way around. All right, that's kind of not off topic at all, but mixing is still a problem because it will result in unhappy relationships. When people have differing priorities in their marriage, it results in unhappiness. Like if one of them is just absolutely obsessed with wealth and the other person is obsessed with something else, like raising their kids right, or I don't know. It's good to have similar priorities. They don't have to be identical. It's good that the higher level the priorities in your life, the more important it is that your spouse share them. And this is a going into it thing. Like I said, once you get married, you should work with what you have. It's not like it can't work. It's just a question of it's going to be harder, And there's nothing wrong with a challenge in that regard. But here's the thing. When you're so different, you become like Ephraim, a cake not turned. Totally all one thing on one side and all one thing on the other. Because, your religious zealotry is going to become emphasized by the contrast of your spouse having no passion at all. You know what I mean? And whatever it is they're into that you're not into, that creates this discrepancy. You know what I mean? It should be one thing. A cake cooked evenly on both sides. You know what I mean? But instead, it's a mixture of two things that becomes unpalatable. Right? A half-cooked pancake. Just think of that. It's probably just cakes of bread, but they would cook like pitas like that. They cook bread flat. But think like a pancake. And it's like, when you ever had a pancake that wasn't fully cooked in the middle? Because who doesn't turn their pancakes, right? But it's not, it's the uncooked batter is not as good. It's not good. It doesn't taste good. It's usually you think, do you finish it? Does anyone sit around spooning batter into their mouth? I don't know anybody like that. If you do, you may have a eating disorder. It's quite frankly, because it's like, I can't wait for the pancakes to cook. I got to eat the batter. That's probably some heavy stuff there. So I do think that I see a connection there. It's like being a cake not turned is like joined to strangers. You're one thing on one side, one thing on the other. It's not a match. It's not evenly cooked. It's an analogy of undesirability. It's like, it's just not, and you think about it, burnt on one side, raw on the other. It's like when someone turns the heat way too much and they cook a steak and they burn the outside and then the inside is completely raw. It's like sometimes when you turn the heat too high, you accomplish nothing. Strangers have devoured his strength, and he knoweth it not. Yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knoweth it not. And this may be, a lot of these things, this is a commentary, right? He's saying a commentary about Israel in their time. It's like, this has something to do with strangers devouring their strength. And, but he doesn't realize it. There's a lot of scriptures where it says, I'm trying to think of Isaiah 42. Like, all these things have set him on fire round about, yet he knew it not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. There's a lot of scriptures about unknowingly suffering, the consequences of things. And, a lot of times people don't realize how much they're hurting themselves through certain actions. And when it says mixed, it is merely not even necessarily married, but they've been mingled together. I mean, they've a lot of foreigners in. And ones that don't mix well with their culture, they're not Jews. They're not Israelites. They're not of the tribes. Now, and so that has caused a further, that is not necessarily exactly why they're idolatrous, but it certainly contributes to their further corruption. And because, they let more and more of them in, and they bring in the worship of other gods. They bring their gods in. And today we say, oh, look at it, it's diversity, isn't it wonderful? It's actually not diversity, it's the opposite. If all the countries in the world became thoroughly mixed, it would destroy all diversity. It would destroy all the differences between us, the things that make different cultures unique. You know what I mean? We'd all, you mix everything together, centralize all the manufacturing. So, I sometimes I have, as part of my work, I look at some videos and pictures of people from vastly different parts of the world. And, you see people down in Africa, and you know what? They're dressed in clothes. It says Coca-Cola, Hard Rock Cafe, whatever. They're wearing, their unique cultures are becoming homogenous. I'm not saying everyone has to be consigned to running around in loincloths, if that's what their culture was 100 years ago. I certainly don't blame them for wanting to wear cotton, and nicely, finely woven. I mean, like the shirt I'm wearing, this is like an athletic shirt. It's like, it's nice material. It's soft. It breathes. You know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of benefits to modern, and people are welcome to dump their culture, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, if you don't like your culture, no one should be forced to like hang on to it. If they want to become homogenized, in many ways, it could be the best thing that happens for people. The more we become alike, the more we understand each other. So I'm not a big diversity proponent anyways. But the thing is, you run the risk. It's one thing if people want to become joined to us. Become a Christian. Become a Christian. Or become, if they were coming into the land saying, we've heard that God is with you. We want to be like you. That's not what went on. We heard of your God and we want to worship him. No, it's like some other arrangement. We're gonna come in here and we're gonna bring our gods. Well, that's all right. Isn't that wonderful? Look at, they have different gods. And say, we'll just all have different gods and we'll all live together in peace and harmony. And it sounds nice, but it's not really what happens. because different gods have different values, different cultures have different values, and people, and depending how different they are from each other, because to truly have something that's diverse, you got to be really different. Racial diversity is like the smallest of diversity. It's like the really, it's not something that there is no difference between people. I mean, because it's like an extended family difference. It's like you're a lot more closely related to people of your race, and so, but I mean, but living in the same country together, having the same religion, having the same cultural experience, can do a lot to bring people together. The people of, I grew up with kids of other races who I was friends with, and I felt a deep and abiding friendship with them and such. And so it's not, in my opinion, the most important thing, but cultural differences can be difficult, because it's like, even when you're like, let's see, you want to try to help someone. As a Christian, I have a certain context in which I can give spiritual help. For a person whose religion is completely different, they may find the things I want to do entirely inappropriate, or an attempt to convert them, which indeed it would be. Because without converting someone to Christianity, I don't know how to help someone in a spiritual way. It's like, I guess I could give them a self-help book. And that's what it might come down to. It's like, give something that's sort of Christian. But, okay, and the reason I was talking about diversity, no, because of this mixing thing. But, we laud it like it's so great, diversity. It's like, yeah, in some ways it's great, in some ways it's not so great. It has its advantages and disadvantages. It's like the true diversity, which is the most useful, which is diversity of minds, meaning, in the there's a scripture that says something like, in the multitude of counselors, safety. In the multitude of counselors. I don't think it said counsel, actually. It said counselors. Having many counselors is safer, because you have the opportunity to hear possibly other opinions. And if you listen to enough intelligent, informed people, and they all agree, you probably have the right course of action, or at least a decent shot at having the right course of action. Sometimes people will say diversity of opinion. They'll say, it's important to have different ideas. It's like, I'm not such a big fan of that. I mean, it's good to have different ideas. It's good to listen to different ideas. It's good to entertain and weigh other ideas. But people being of all these different minds is not in and of itself this wonderful thing. As far as, how can two walk together except they be agreed? It depends on what your purpose is. If your purpose is let's just debate things that we don't understand and find out maybe we'll get closer to the truth. Well, there you go. Like, if you have a great unknown, a great unknown, and bring in all different ideas and opinions is a great idea, because you have no idea what the truth is. And so, in order to find the truth, you best listen to a lot of different thought on it. That's what I do sometimes when I'm trying to understand a verse. It's like I open up my mind to different ideas. I mean, literally just open up my mind to listening to whatever ideas I might be able to extract from the nature of reality. Or if occasionally I have to go to other people. I'm actually pretty good with tuning into ideas on my own. And if that sounds weird, it's because of my thought of ideas as being things that exist outside of your mind, to which your mind tunes into, essentially. Like, as Einstein did not have the theory of relativity lodged somewhere in his brain and had to be extracted, but rather it was something that always had existed in reality and that he had to tune into, and that's part of what you're doing. And it's a rough analogy when I say tune into. That may sound a little weird. But yeah, you might to get at a new idea, you may need a lot of diversity of thought, and then it's good. But let's say there's a settled truth diversity of thought is not such a great thing in that case. You know what I mean? It's not always so great to have different minds. I mean, though I would say to any person who's studying, it is good to and what I mean is in a certain context, because as a teacher, it's like I want to listen to other ideas, because it's impossible for you to go out in the world without encountering other ideas. I'm just saying, if you're going to join together to do something, if you're going to try to form a cohesive nation, that nation should be agreed somewhat on the form of government, right? Like, it's kind of, we live in a somewhat frightening time in our country when we have newspapers even speaking of ways in which they think free speech ought to be curtailed. Some kinds of speaking, which is essentially, so you're not allowed to express certain thoughts with words, which with some thoughts, words is the best way they should be expressed. Meaning, certain kinds of hatred and thoughts of violence ought to be given voice to instead of acted upon. Because given voice to it, one, it kind of warns people. It's like, okay, this guy's thinking of, doing something crazy, right? He's thinking of blowing something up. Well, maybe we ought to talk to him about that. Maybe it's a sign that passions are running high along certain lines of issues. But instead, what they want to say is like, look at, people are going to do crazy things if we allow this talk to go on. Let's say people are upset about immigration, and like that guy down in El Paso, right? He upset about that, and he goes shooting people up, and it's a terrible, awful, horrible thing. But the thing is, the thing is, they want to shut down places where people are giving voice to their frustrations about this. That won't make those frustrations go away. It will drive them underground. And instead of being expressed on forums and in conversations, because I've had conversations with guys like this, and I've had conversations with people who hate Jews, who hate blacks, and try to talk to them reasonably. Try to reason with them to get them to perhaps reconsider their thoughts. But instead what you do, you drive them into smaller and smaller groups where they're only talking to people who totally agree with them with bad ideas. And so you drive it underground. And because we have to live together in this country. We have to live together in this world to some degree. And so in the areas where we can find agreement, it's good. And in the areas where we don't agree, it's good to talk. Because when people can't talk about things, like if a married couple has a problem between them and they can't talk about it, it's something that just they just have to keep silence about. We best not talk about that, because they're afraid of what's going to come out. But the thing is, all the while you're not talking about that stuff is just festering under the surface, and it's going to express itself in an unexpected place. I'm a big fan of the get the issues out in the open type idea, and that's why I think freedom of speech is important on many levels. And outside of someone calling for direct calls to violence, if someone has a hatred, they should by all means talk about it. You know what I mean? So people can reason with them. Just because you drive, when it becomes acceptable to talk about certain things anywhere, what do people talk? What do they do? You think it's just going to go away? They'll just shrivel up because they're alone? No, they'll just stew in their rage until they decide to take things into their own hands. And you find a message board where they say like, "Oh, I'm going to do this," and you think, "Oh, that's the problem." It's not the problem. People aren't listening to the things that are making people angry. I'm not saying you have to necessarily, threats of violence should not govern the way we make decisions, but it's something to consider that, like, are there problems that are causing people rage? And and to deny, to say that it's like, oh, it's all good, the things that are happening that enrage people. It's like, if that's true, then you should be able to talk about it. Because if you can't talk about it, I question the I want to say innocuousness, but I question your position if it's right. Because if you can't talk about something, then maybe you're not right. You know. So, and then that would be this is a rough verse to cover, I guess, at this time, whatever. I don't find it rough, because the thing is, the problem is, people are afraid to talk about things like racial differences and mixing, or cultural differences and mixing, and because it's like a taboo, because it smells like racism. But it doesn't have to be racism. It's just a question of the reality of human interactions. As humans are diverse, as they are fond of mentioning. They have diverse minds, diverse outward external appearances, which like I said, is one of the lesser things. Because it's not really the appearance of other races that upsets people. They come in with different languages. They come in with different cultural practices. They come in and, let's say, lend power to your enemies. You know what I mean? Like, if someone has the perception that, like, oh, we have all these people coming into the country and it's going to change the country, and then, and let's say they suspect maybe my group is going to end up to be hated. I mean, because it's like, I tell you what, I never dreamed when I was growing up that I thought, I heard my elders speak in, disparaging terms of other races and stuff. But the way I grew up and the way I learned things in school and from other people is like, I thought this was all, that was kind of like the past, and it was fading away. And I really believe things like that Martin Luther King taught, or the things he dreamed about. Like his I Have a Dream speech, where everybody's going to be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. I thought that was what we were headed towards. I never dreamed that I'd fear that my children would end up, or my grandchildren would end up growing up in a world in which they were hated for their race. And that's very much the world that people are trying to create. And that should be troubling to everybody, because racial hatred in the past didn't have, what do you think? Other, do the brown people think they'll be better at racism than the white people were? You know what I mean? To put quite a nice fine point on it. Do you think you'll be better at it? Do you think you'll, that that the future people who live under this are going to be less resentful or less violent about it? It's going to cause violence and conflict. It's not a good idea. We shouldn't. Hatred towards any group of people should not be encouraged. But if you feel it, it ought to be talked about. It ought to be talked about. And the difficulties of bringing strangers into the land ought to be talked about. This is what they're afraid of. The strangers are going to devour their strength. And you know what? And to deny that can happen, you know what I mean? If you, like, let's say, I mean, there is some point at which, like, let's say in your country you take in 1 billion, I throw a big number out there just because it's silly, but 1 billion uneducated, unskilled people who are in absolute poverty. You just bring them into your country. It's not going to have some ill effect, and they're all pagans, cannibals. I know there aren't that many pagan cannibals on the world. I'm just saying, isn't there on some level in which the bringing in a lot of strangers into your country might be a bad idea? On some level, right? It's not. We shouldn't be xenophobic and like just, oh, God forbid we have anyone different around us. But bring in vast numbers can be, and what happens is people see it happening, and maybe it's not vast numbers, but they're concerned, they're afraid. You know what I mean? And it's something that should be talked about, not something that should be try to sweep it under the rug. Because, there are crazy people who not being able to talk about certain issues or having people say that, like, oh, you're crazy, this is wonderful. We can take in, there's no limit to the things that can happen. They become paranoid, they become fearful, and then they start taking up arms and they start fighting, taking matters into their own hands. Because they feel like they can't talk about it. Because there's no room for them at the table for discussion. There's things that people will say, there's no room. I mean, even like, some things they don't want you to be allowed to say. And they're absolutely insane because they will provoke a conflict. If you can't talk about it, you will fight about it. You may not even know that's what you're fighting about. That's another thing. He knew it not. Right? You can have strangers come in and devour your strength. Or I'm going to use the analogy of a husband and wife. Right? You've got this seething issue between you can't talk about. You got like she's resenting him for something he did. And he's resenting her for something she did. And neither one will talk about it because this is the marriage they've built. Right? They won't talk about it. And so then something happens, like one person forgets to put a dish away or leaves a dirty plate somewhere. And then the other one is like angry, mean, nasty, and the other one said, well, you blah, blah, blah. And now they are talking about something, not the actual thing that's making them really angry and deeply resentful. And so they're arguing over some little piddly thing. And they're fighting over some little piddly thing. Because they were afraid to talk about the big issue. You know what I mean? Because, oftentimes what it is people can't talk about things because one or other or both is not willing to acknowledge the other has any point. Like a lot of times you have very extremes on the issues, and you have to get someone to adopt a moderated position. Take some discussion. You know what I mean? Where they can accommodate one another. But let's, you just give no heed to the idea that, like, oh, I'm bringing in all kinds of false religions into my country, and they are prospering in our midst and turning us from God. I mean, that's the way they would have lost their strength. I mean, in our country today, what they think that strangers are devouring their strength by, using resources and stuff or taking jobs or whatever. It's like, I'm not arguing one side or the other of that. I'm just saying people should be able to talk about it. That's my assertion. They should be able to talk about it. They should be able to give voice to their feelings without being hounded off the out of the conversation. The people with the most extreme opinions are the people you need most in the conversation. Especially if you think those opinions need to be modified. Not all things, I would you were cold or hot. But, a cake needs to be turned and cooked on both sides. There is a position for a moderate position. But not when it comes to, like, our faith, necessarily. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't mind people of other faiths existing in this country, because this country was built on the idea that, like, look at, we Protestants have a lot of denominations, and we have a lot of difference of opinion. We're going to separate that from government. And therefore, everyone's going to be free to have his own conscience. And so, by having this idea, we're going to have all these different religions, and they were all Christian religions, of course. I mean, because it's not, doesn't necessarily work with other religions. Because part of it is we can have a debate about Christianity. We can have a debate about with other religions too. But they have to be willing to fight on those grounds. Christians decide, let's not have another 100 years war or another 30, that's not a religious war. Let's not have another 30 Years' War, which was ostentatiously religious, but it's ultimately like people blame, let's say, oh, it's religion. Well, it's about territory in terms of religion. Some people get a religious idea and they break off from the main religion, and then the leaders of that religion aren't too happy about it, and so they want to get the king. It was all about power. It was more about territory than it was about actual. They weren't warring because, oh, I believe in the priesthood of all believers. That wasn't like the real reason they're fighting. Because there's no reason that differing over doctrine makes you go to war. Because we do it all the time without going to war. The idea that we would have to come to fist fights, it's because kings get involved. Because power and money are involved. Men are willing to, it's like, no, you won't go and form your own church. We're not going to let you do that. But anyways, in America we decided we're going to be able to talk, we're going to have freedom of religion, and that allows, because I'm free to have my own conscience, we can sit around and argue about it. And it's not like this thing that we have to fight over because it's like we're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to have a different opinion. No, you're allowed to have other opinions, so you can talk about it. That doesn't mean that, like, let's say in my church, because remember, the Christianity came to be in the Roman Empire, which was dominated by paganism. So we are like an invasive force in the early days. So it's totally different than Judaism, which was an established state. And again, I call it Judaism, but in the Old Testament, it wasn't called Judaism. That was something that was developed after the captivities. Prior to that, it was just the Mosaic Law, but there was a lot of chaos because people were not. I mean, just today, also, the Jews, the idea that all Jews practice Judaism, not true, not true at all. You have a lot of secular and unbelieving Jews. You have a lot of Jews that are Christians. So there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference of opinion, and it doesn't, they kind of unite behind their ethnicity to some degree. Some people dispute whether it's a religion or an ethnicity. They're definitely a lot more open to taking people in of other races now. Like if you marry, people can marry into Jewish families and become Jews, at least more readily than they could in the Old Testament. Gray hairs, that's metaphorical. You know what I mean? Because what are gray hairs? Gray hairs are from age. I've got a few here, right? Got a nice helping. It's like, but what it means when your hair is going gray is like, the idea is that the cares and stresses of life have taken their toll on you. It's not necessarily true as far as I know. I don't know that cares make you go gray. Certainly they can make you look old. So I don't know, maybe it can't. Maybe being a careworn person. I always said, like, my left brain is very stressed out, but my right brain is still in its youth or whatever. I don't know. It's silly. I don't know how that works. But we do understand the metaphor that cares and such, sort of turn your hair gray. That is the thought. And it's mostly, here's the thing, is as men get old and women, our hairs tend to turn gray. And it's seen as a sign of a lot of things, but it certainly means someone has experienced life. You know what I mean? Or it can mean. Gray hairs are appearing on him. He's getting older. His strength is waning. You know what I mean? The years are taking its toll. He's saying as years take their toll, so the strangers are taking their toll. I've gone through, I'm going slowly through Hosea. I guess because I feel like these ideas are pertinent and now and very, how do I just throw it out there? You know what I mean? Like strangers, hey, foreigners are bad. I think it just seems like a bit, like I said, you have to contextualize that for Israel. And then for a Christian, it's contextualized to the context of the church. It's like, I can't have a church where we all disagree on critical points of doctrine. Yeah, I mean, I can't have a church where we just, and people do, where we just bring in, it's like, oh, in this church we represent all kinds of gods. It ceases to be a Christian church. It's a cake not turned. It's not evenly heated on all sides. It's not one thing. It's still batter and burn. It's not one complete cooked cake. Half-baked. There's half-baked ideas, half-baked churches, half-baked plans. I forgot we had that idiom. Half-baked. Right? A cake not turned is half-baked. A half-baked plan as well. You haven't fully considered everything. It's like you kind of got it's like Jesus says, who goes out to build a tower and doesn't count the cost? Otherwise, people are going to laugh at you and say, this guy started to build a tower, but then he couldn't finish because he didn't count the cost. He didn't realize how much it would cost. He started a project and couldn't finish it. I hate that. When I say that, I hate that because it's like it strikes me down into my soul. I have a lot of half-finished projects. It wasn't because of the money. It's just almost like he didn't realize there are only 24 hours in the day. And that he only had so many days to live. I guess. I don't know. Hopefully those projects will get finished. But the unfinished projects are something that haunt me. And the pride of Israel testifieth to his face. But the unawareness. I had a thing I was going to say that about I guess what I'm saying is, let me just address this, yet he knoweth not. Notice they repeat it, and he knoweth it not. It's important. When you're losing strength, it's good to know what's happening. It's like, I started to say this, but it's like, we can and I'm just going to wrap it up because I feel like I don't know if I covered it the way I wanted to, but I wanted to succinctly say, you can have bad things happen, like having too many immigrants coming into your country. Maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know. At some point it's a bad thing. Where exactly is it a bad thing? Well, it should be something people can talk about. Like, how much is too much? Seems logical to me. At some point there's going to be too much, right? I think everyone can agree that at some point there's too many people. Where does that lie? I don't know. But the thing is, it would be foolish to then just say, well, you know what? It's all great. Bring everybody into the church. Who cares what their religion is? Marry anybody you want. Who cares what they think? Let strange things into your life in all manner of places. Let strangers into your home. Sure, people do that, right? You see strangers, say, come into my home. Come into my home and live here. Stranger, right? But then to have them devour your strength or eat up your goods or ruin your church or in some way undermine everything in your life, like you're trying to build up your life and your spouse is undermining you or whatever, and you're in such denial that you don't even know what's happening. You know what I mean? Oh, no, because you know why? Because we arbitrarily decided strangers are wonderful. Bringing in strange people to your church, to your country, to your family, it's wonderful on every level. And you should never question that or talk about it. And no one, yeah, and then when bad people come with bad ideas, bad practices, bad religion, whatever it is, I'm just saying this applies across life, from the country level to the world, down to the level of the family, to your personal relationships. You gotta know, it's like someone was saying, surround yourself with people who want good for you. What are the people you are bringing into your land? What do they want? Do they want to make your land a better place? Are they going to contribute? Do you just bring people into your family who are just going to take? I'm just saying. I'm not accusing any group of people of anything. I'm just saying these are things that you have to consider and you have to measure. Are they contributing or are they destroying? Are they tearing everything apart? Or are they helping us bring it together? And it's always good. It's always bringing it together. Okay. We have crazy people who disagree and you won't let them talk about it. So, yeah. They'll probably pass some law that will do nothing to change anything or help anything else. Oh, you need background checks. It's like, did he have a criminal record? I don't think so. They say, the guy in El Paso, they say he bought his guns legally. And that means he probably didn't have a felony record. And no amount of background checking would have done a thing. Not that I oppose the idea of background checking, but it isn't going to solve anything. It might solve a few things, right? So I shouldn't say anything. It'll solve a few things. Of course, if there was a guy. I remember there was a guy. I forgot which one it was. A guy who shot someplace up. I think it was a church. And the thing is, he passed the background check, but because, quite frankly, the military didn't report some things he had been convicted of while in the military to the proper reporting agency, because they didn't report his convictions, he was able to acquire a firearm when he was not legally, he should not have been legally able to do so. And so he passed a wonderful background check because no one had reported his background. So you can pass all the laws you want. Things are still going to slip through the cracks, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't take reasonable precautions, I guess. I've never been so anxious to buy a gun that I couldn't wait a day or two. I ain't got a problem with that. Like, I need to shoot that bird right now. I don't know. I mean, it's like something you should plan ahead for in life. You should already have a gun. You shouldn't need to run and get one tomorrow. And when you buy it, it's a big purchase, so you should be careful. You should think about it. I wouldn't want to. I hardly buy anything on the first. Any big purchase. Like I looked at, I want to get. Well, actually, I haven't bought one yet, but I've been looking at air conditioners for a couple of years, watching them and thinking about, someday. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. What it is the Israelites, Ephraim being the representative tribe, like a silly dove without heart. Man, I have doves in my property, and they are they seem to be less intelligent than other birds. And they seem to be actually, sometimes I feel like, can these things fly properly? They definitely don't have the same agility as a lot of songbirds. Like, we got swallows, and they're amazing. I mean, they're just little acrobats of the air. And obviously, different birds are different, there's different kinds of birds. But doves are very, I don't know, you ever see a dove's nest? I mean, I'm always surprised we have so many doves. You know what I mean? I mean, because they build like the most. My wife and I, when we saw them, we're like, that's the dove's nest. It's like, 20 sticks in a little pile. And they're young, and the way they raise them, I'm like, oh my God, how do they ever succeed? Just blind luck, I guess. I mean, they take some care. But it's like they just are definitely a nice analogy for silly, careless creatures. I'm sure silly, I'm going to quickly look it up in Hebrew. What verse is that, 11? probably not a good translation. Patha, allure. Dr. Strong, you're letting me down. Let's try American Standard Version. It says silly dove. Silly, really? Silly. I'm going to go for the Devil's Translation itself. The NIV. I can ask my wife if I should stop saying that. Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived and senseless. No, that's too much. See, that's why the NIV is the Devil's Translation. Because it's like, they did all your thinking for you. I don't want to think. I don't want you to think for me. I just want you to translate. Because I don't know Hebrew. Let me show you this. Like, this is the problem with the Devil's Translation. I mean, I don't think it is the Devil's Translation, by the way, but I know the King James only people are really upset. I am a King James preferred person. I didn't realize that was a thing. I was glad to find there were people like that. I prefer the King James. I don't think it's like the only thing, but I just like it. Yes, that's me. I like the King James. And besides, that's where I memorized my scriptures. I'm there. And plus, I think it lends... You gotta understand, the Hebrew even was written in ancient Hebrew versus like modern Hebrew. So to a modern person reading it, it's also like reading the King James for us. In fact, probably much worse. Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived and senseless. Again, that is definitely not a translation of that verse. That is a thought for thought reimagining of the verse. And maybe they're right. He's a silly dove without understanding. Now, wait. I'm going to see if I can glean a little thing out of them. Senseless. Easily deceived. Without understanding. I'm trying to figure out which one they're thinking goes with that. Let's try. We got the NIV. Skip the NLT. That's the New Living Translation. ESV, English Standard Version. That might be a decent one to look. I think this is actually a really simple translation. It may not be so good. Like a dove, silly and without sense. They got the word silly in there. Silly comes up a lot. Is that really the word? Come on, New American Standard. Okay, everyone likes the word silly, so I'm, it just was really hard for me to think, oh, silly? Really, that's what that word means in Hebrew. Silly, huh? Silly. I do like the term senseless, because that's when I think of what is silly. Unsensible, right? Yeah, see, here we go. Patha. I know why I said allure. The definition in Strong's is to be spacious, wide, or open. And by therefore, I see it as being like kind of vacuous, empty. Not having sense. Let's see here. Entice. It's been used for a lot of things, man. Deceive, entice. Now it said allure. And it's used in different places to, like, are not deceived. One who is deceived or enticed. And now I see the idea of to be spacious or open. This idea is like wide open to attack. Wide open to deceit. And doves are definitely wide open, man. They build their nests in really bad locations. They leave their young in the open. Like we were just like, oh god, the cat's gonna get those doves. They're just sitting there. Mama dove, move your baby somehow. Shoo him. Like a baby robin literally will hop off and try to escape, whereas like doves will just kind of sit there and wait to be killed. They are wide open, easy marks. If you want to go hunting birds, if I want to catch birds with a net, I put my money on doves as far as being easiest to catch. Sparrows in a sense too because of certain things, but I'm just saying, I mean like a hand net, not like a big one where I set a snare. I mean like I'm going to just go ahead and rope one. But now, sometimes I like to find that meaning of the word, understand why a word that means wide open is being translated silly. And what it means is apt to be deceived, open to deception, open to, and it can mean, I didn't go through all the different meanings. Let's see, open to deception, open to enticement. Entice and deceive are kind of similar ideas, like seduce, entice are good synonyms for each other. Envy slayeth the silly one, enticed, deceived. It's also been translated for flattery. They did flatter him with their mouth. Just looking at the different ways it's used in the King James. It's translated flatter several times, and I can see how that also could be the idea of like, just you'll say anything. Open speaking, speaking too broadly of someone. I mean, so broadly that you overreach reality. Okay, doves are open, easy marks, and so he's saying, oh, where's my scripture? Israel is an easy mark. He's wide open. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. He is a open mark for deceit. He goes to, and also the idea of someone who is easily deceived, easily believes. You know what I mean? The reason they go to Egypt and Assyria was to buy help. And I'm concerned now because I'm going over and my study got cut off yesterday for no reason I understand. I haven't gone back and even checked that. I hope this is not also being cut off. But I'm going to wrap it up. I'll pick it up with verse 12, and I will talk a little bit about the Egypt and Assyria issue as we talk about that. We're going awfully slow, but we're making our way. Hopefully we'll go through a little more than that. But like I said, a lot of these verses are sort of like he's a cake not turned. And that's like a day's discussion right there. Anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to picking up with you again tomorrow. Verse 12.
Fill ye up then the measure of your father. Ye serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood